On Saturday night, March 8, 2026, Iran launched Kheibar Shekan ballistic missiles directly at the BAZAN oil refinery in Haifa Bay. That is not a minor installation. It is the single largest oil processing facility in the entire state of Israel. It supplies more than half of the country's fuel: diesel for its trucks, gasoline for its cars, kerosene for its fighter jets. Without it, Israel does not function as a modern economy. The IRGC published its strike confirmation within minutes on SEPA News. Their message was brutally simple: you hit our refinery, we hit yours. This was the 27th wave of Operation True Promise 4, a timed and calculated retaliation that landed minutes after Israeli warplanes struck fuel depots in southern Tehran for the first time in this war. Iran watched its own oil infrastructure burn on live footage streaming from the capital, and within that same hour, it fired precision-guided ballistic missiles at the facility that keeps Israeli jets fueled, Israeli convoys moving, and Israeli generators running. Over the next several minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how Iran struck Israel's most critical energy asset, why the Kheibar Shekan missile represents a fundamental shift in the balance of this war, and where this conflict is heading next, because neither side has defined what the end looks like, and that should concern everyone. Before we continue, I want to sincerely thank you for being here. Your support is what makes this coverage possible, and I do not take it for granted. If you find value in this kind of analysis, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps more people find these updates when they matter most. Let us start with what triggered the retaliation. On the night of March 8th, Israel struck oil targets inside Iran for the first time in this war. The IDF confirmed it had hit fuel sites that supply, in their words, both civilian and military consumers. That framing matters, and I will explain why shortly. Fires erupted across oil depots in Tehran and Alborz provinces. Footage from the Shiran depot on the outskirts of Tehran showed a wall of flame visible for kilometers. CNN geolocated a separate fire near a fuel storage site northeast of the city using satellite imagery. By morning, residents across entire neighborhoods were reporting something surreal: black rain. Soot from the burning crude had mixed with atmospheric moisture and was falling as dark, oily water over homes, schools, and streets. That is not a metaphor. That is what happened. The IDF's language, civilian and military consumers, matters because it acknowledges openly that the targets served civilian populations. Under international humanitarian law, dual-use infrastructure strikes carry an obligation of proportionality. Whether that standard was met here is a question that lawyers, courts, and historians will be arguing over for decades. What is not debatable is what came next. The IRGC published its statement within minutes of the Tehran strikes. The exact wording read, "In response to targeting the Tehran refinery, we just targeted the Haifa refinery." The weapon system identified was the Kheibar Shekan. The strike was designated as the 27th wave of Operation True Promise 4. Now we need to talk about why that specific missile was chosen, because the engineering behind the Kheibar Shekan is the reason Iran has sustained 29 waves of missile operations across 9 straight days of bombardment from 2 of the most advanced militaries on Earth. And its mobile launcher fleet has not been eliminated. The Kheibar Shekan is a third-generation, solid-fuel, medium-range ballistic missile operated by the IRGC Aerospace Force. It was first publicly revealed in February 2022, on the 43rd anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. The name itself translates to Breaker of Kheibar, a deliberate reference to the 7th century battle in which Muslim forces conquered the fortified settlement of Kheibar near Medina. The ideological signal embedded in that naming is intentional and unmistakable. Specifications are as follows. The missile measures 11.4 meters in length, with a body diameter of 0.76 meters. Launch weight falls between 4.5 and 6.3 tons, depending on the variant. The warhead carries approximately 550 kilograms of high explosive. Its official range is listed at 1,450 kilometers, more than enough to reach deep into Israeli territory from launch positions in western Iran. An upgraded variant, designated Kheibar Shekan 2, reportedly extends that envelope to 1,800 kilometers. But range is not the real story here. The real story is fuel. Specifically, what kind of fuel? Older Iranian systems, the Shahab series in particular, run on liquid propellant. Liquid fuel means hours of exposed preparation on an open launch pad. Fueling, pressurizing, aligning. That creates a massive vulnerability window during which satellites, surveillance drones, and signals intelligence can locate the launcher and destroy it before it ever fires. For decades, that was the fundamental weakness of Iran's ballistic missile force. The preparation time gave adversaries a kill chain. The Kheibar Shekan eliminated that problem entirely. Solid fuel means the missile arrives preloaded, sealed, and ready. It can sit hidden on a transporter erector launcher built on a standard commercial truck chassis, disguised as a civilian cargo vehicle, parked inside a warehouse or under a highway overpass. When the order comes, it can fire within minutes. Iranian state sources have stated that preparation time dropped by a factor of 6 compared to its liquid-fueled predecessors. That single engineering change is the entire reason Iran has sustained 29 waves of missile operations in 9 days, without running out of mobile launchers. You cannot destroy what you cannot find. And you cannot find what looks like a freight truck parked next to 100 other freight trucks in an industrial district. The warhead itself is a maneuverable re-entry vehicle built on a triconic airframe, designed to maintain aerodynamic stability during aggressive terminal phase course corrections. It carries satellite-aided guidance, likely a combination of Beidou and GLONASS positioning, with the capability to adjust its trajectory continuously, all the way to the moment of impact. Terminal velocity estimates vary significantly. Some sources report Mach 2 to 3 on final approach, suggesting a quasi-ballistic glide trajectory. Others put the figure between Mach 7 and Mach 10, consistent with a steep re-entry profile. That discrepancy is itself significant. It suggests either deliberate ambiguity from Iranian sources intended to complicate Israeli defense planning, or genuine uncertainty among Western intelligence analysts about the system's actual performance envelope. Either interpretation leads to the same conclusion. This missile is specifically engineered to defeat layered air defense architectures. Whether those defenses held at Haifa is something we will return to, because as of this recording, neither government has given a straight answer. Now consider the target. The BAZAN Group oil refinery complex in Haifa Bay is not just any industrial facility. It is the largest oil processing operation in the entire country. It occupies approximately 526 acres of coastal land, situated roughly 2 kilometers from residential neighborhoods. It processes imported crude oil and supplies between 50 and 60% of Israel's total domestic fuel needs: diesel for ground transportation, gasoline, kerosene used as aviation fuel, and cooking gas for households. Israel has only one other significant refinery, the Paz oil plant in Ashdod, which operates at around 110,000 barrels per day. If BAZAN goes offline for an extended period, there is no domestic facility capable of filling that gap. The country would become entirely dependent on emergency fuel imports that would need to arrive by sea through a region where missiles and drones are flying daily. Most people assume Israel's energy security rests on its much-celebrated natural gas discoveries in the eastern Mediterranean, the Leviathan and Karish fields. In reality, both of those offshore platforms were shut down as a precautionary measure when this war began on February 28th. Gas exports to Egypt were almost certainly halted at the same time. So when the Kheibar Shekan missiles arrived at Haifa Bay, Israel's energy infrastructure was already operating in emergency mode before a single warhead detonated. And critically, this was not the first time. In June 2025, during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, the same BAZAN complex took a direct hit. 3 employees were killed. The on-site power station, which generates steam and electricity for core refinery operations, was severely damaged. All refining operations were suspended. BAZAN reported the damage through mandatory filings to the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Trading in BAZAN shares was halted. The Energy Ministry estimated 2 weeks to restore even basic processing capability. Pipeline systems, transmission infrastructure, and downstream processing units all sustained damage. The refinery eventually came back online, but the vulnerability had been exposed for the entire world to see. So when the IRGC launched Kheibar Shekan missiles at that exact same complex 9 months later, they were not guessing. They were striking a target with a proven track record of being penetrable. A target whose strategic value and defensive gaps had already been demonstrated under real combat conditions. As of this recording, Israeli military sources have neither confirmed nor denied the specific extent of damage from the March 8th strike. That pattern mirrors June 2025, when it took days for the full picture to emerge through stock exchange disclosures and energy ministry assessments. If the pattern holds, expect a quiet BAZAN filing to the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange within the next 48 to 72 hours. Stay with me, because the Haifa refinery strike is not an isolated event. It is one data point in a rapidly expanding energy war that is already reshaping the global economy in real time. This entire escalation began on February 28th, when the United States and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran under the operational name Epic Fury. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed, along with family members, senior military commanders, and an unknown number of civilians. Over 2,000 strikes were conducted across at least 26 of Iran's 31 provinces in the opening days alone. As of day 9, the Iranian Red Crescent reported at least 1,332 Iranians killed, including 194 children. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes killed 123 people and displaced 95,000. 7 American service members are confirmed dead. A strike on a primary school killed at least 160 people, the vast majority of them schoolgirls aged 7 to 12. UNESCO called it a grave violation of humanitarian law. Human Rights Watch called for a war crimes investigation. Iran's response has been relentless and sustained. By March 5th, the IRGC reported launching over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and nearly 2,000 drones since the war began. 40% directed at Israel, 60% aimed at American targets across the region. The IRGC openly declared that it considers the United States the primary enemy in this conflict and has prioritized American military assets accordingly. Targets have included Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Beersheba, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, a destroyer operating in the Indian Ocean, the 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the United Arab Emirates, and Sheikh Issa Air Base in Bahrain. The Strait of Hormuz is where this story becomes a global crisis. An IRGC commander stated publicly that the strait was closed, and that any vessel attempting passage would be, in his words, set ablaze. Tanker traffic collapsed from an average of over 100 vessel transits per day to just 4 on March 1st. 3 of those 4 were flying Iranian flags. By midweek, transit had dropped to near zero for any ship not flagged by Iran or China. More than 150 commercial vessels sat anchored outside the strait, unable or unwilling to cross. On March 5th, the IRGC refined its position. The closure applied only to vessels linked to the United States, Israel, and Western allied nations. Chinese-owned vessels were transiting freely. One bulk carrier, the Iron Maiden, sailed through while broadcasting the words "China owner" on open maritime channels. A Turkish tanker identified itself as Muslim-owned and Turkish-operated and passed without incident. Here is why this matters for everyone, not just the Middle East. 20 million barrels of oil move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That represents roughly 1/5 of the entire global supply. 84% of the crude flowing through that corridor heads to Asian markets. China, India, Japan, and South Korea together account for 69% of all Hormuz shipments. Only 4.2 million barrels per day can be rerouted through existing bypass infrastructure: the Saudi East-West Pipeline and the UAE's Fujairah Pipeline. That leaves approximately 16 million barrels per day at risk if the closure holds. Brent crude surged from approximately $70 before the war to above $92 by Friday, March 7th, a 27% weekly gain. By Sunday evening, Brent crossed $100 per barrel for the first time since 2022, climbing past $107. West Texas Intermediate briefly touched $101. Goldman Sachs raised its second quarter oil forecast by $10 and warned that 5 sustained weeks of Hormuz disruption could push prices well past $120 per barrel. American gasoline prices hit $3.41 per gallon, up 43 cents in a single week. Goldman estimated that traders were already pricing in a $14 per barrel risk premium, based solely on the probability of continued closure. The damage extends well beyond the strait itself. Saudi Arabia intercepted 20 drones targeting Aramco's Kheibar oil field. The Ras Tanura refinery, which processes 550,000 barrels per day, sustained limited damage from interception debris. Bahrain's Sitra refinery was targeted. Fujairah port storage in the UAE was struck. Oman's Duqm port facility came under fire. Kuwait halted crude production entirely, reduced refinery throughput, and declared force majeure on all oil exports. 2 people were killed in Saudi Arabia, the first Saudi fatalities of this war. And then there is Qatar. The world's largest liquefied natural gas exporter shut down gas production on March 2nd and declared force majeure on LNG contracts 2 days later. Qatar's energy minister warned publicly that if fighting continues, every Gulf producer may be forced to halt exports. His exact words were that this will bring down the economies of the world. European natural gas futures surged more than 50% in 48 hours before partially retreating. Most people still think this is a regional conflict between Iran and Israel. It is not. It is an energy war with a blast radius that reaches every gas station, every shipping lane, and every central bank on Earth. Here's where the political layer cracks open. Donald Trump demanded unconditional surrender from Iran. He stated the war would continue for a little while and said he was not concerned about rising gas prices. The White House projected 4 to 6 weeks to achieve its military objectives. When pressed about the closed strait, Trump said it was the ship's choice to avoid passage and claimed Washington had already wiped out Iran's navy. On March 8th, Iran's Assembly of Experts elected Mojtaba Khamenei, the late Supreme Leader's son, as his successor. The IRGC and Iran's senior leadership pledged allegiance immediately. Trump called him a lightweight and said he would not last long. But the regime did not collapse. The chain of command held. A new leader was installed within 8 days of the assassination, and the missile waves never stopped. And here's the contradiction nobody in Washington wants to confront. The Washington Post revealed a pre-war assessment from the U.S. National Intelligence Council, concluding that a large-scale military assault on Iran was unlikely to topple the government. The same assessment described the prospect of Iran's fractured opposition seizing power as unlikely. Whether President Trump read that assessment before ordering the strikes remains an open question. What is not an open question is the result. 9 days in, 29 waves of retaliation, a new supreme leader seated, and the IRGC command structure intact. Iranian President Pezeshkian stated publicly that Iran will not capitulate. The wave tempo tells the real story. Analysts noted that Iran's ballistic missile launch rate declined between day 1 and day 4, pointing to either stockpile depletion or deliberate conservation for a prolonged campaign. But then waves 25 through 29 arrived in rapid succession, each deploying different weapon systems: Kheibar Shekan, Fatah, Imad, Khorramshahr 4, and a previously unseen system designated Etimad. Either Iran possesses deeper strategic reserves than any outside estimate predicted, or it is burning through its remaining inventory in a calculated final surge designed to inflict maximum damage before attrition takes hold. Neither answer is reassuring. Saturday night, both sides struck each other's oil infrastructure within the same hour. The Haifa Refinery, supplying more than half of Israel's fuel, was targeted with precision-guided ballistic missiles for the second time in 9 months. The Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed to Western shipping. Oil prices have surged more than 40% since the war began and crossed $100 per barrel. Qatar has declared force majeure on global gas contracts. Kuwait has stopped exporting oil. 7 Americans are dead. Over 1,300 Iranians are dead, including nearly 200 children. A new supreme leader is seated in Tehran, and neither government, not Washington, not Tehran, not Jerusalem, has defined what an acceptable end to this conflict even looks like. No ceasefire terms have been proposed. No off-ramps have been offered. No back-channel negotiations have been acknowledged. That is not a war with an exit strategy. That is a war running on momentum, and momentum does not negotiate. Thank you for watching. I genuinely appreciate your time and support. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you. Do you think this war is spiraling beyond control? Does either side have a path to a conclusion? Let me know. Please subscribe and leave a like if you want to stay informed on these developments. Click the video on screen for the next update. I will see you soon.